As we had promised, we acted accordingly. The powerful armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran, they act upon their stated commitments with speed and precision and make their American and Zionist enemies regret their actions.
Should the terror regime make the mistake of attacking us again, we will respond with force, because Israel has the full right to self-defense, and we will exercise it as much as necessary.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and before that, Ibrahim Zolfagari, who's a spokesperson for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. We're now going to go in depth on the story that we brought you earlier about renewed hostilities between Iran and Israel and President Trump's message that he calls the shots in the region, seemingly a rebuke to the Israeli Prime Minister. Joining us now is Yechiel Leiter, the Israeli ambassador to the United States. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for taking time this afternoon. I know it's a very busy day.
Good to be with you, John.
I wanted to ask you, first of all, about the IRGC spokesman and what he said there. They seem to suffer from delusions of grandeur. Every missile that they fired at Israel over the weekend was taken down by the Iron Dome and other missile defense systems, yet they're talking like their attack was devastating.
Well, it shouldn't surprise us. They do have delusions of grandeur. These are the madmen of Tehran. They've been calling for and working towards Israel's destruction now for 47 years. And they have not been successful. And on the contrary, together with our senior partner, the United States, we've degraded the Iranian forces. The issue is this. I mean, they fire ballistic missiles that can kill, maim, really destroy neighborhoods at will. And there's no self-respecting country in the world that would absorb so many ballistic missiles into their territory without responding. We had to respond. We did respond. And they got a taste of how we can respond.
Now, I saw a report in Axios that President Trump had said that he was going to call Prime Minister Netanyahu and tell him not to respond to the first wave of Iranian missiles. Is that true?
Well, you know, John, I've been on all these calls and all the meetings that the Prime Minister has with the President, and I can tell you that there are journalists in the circuit who like to play up a certain narrative. The conversations between the Prime Minister and the President are cordial, they're friendly, they have a deep friendship that goes back some 40 years. And sometimes lovers have a spat. And sometimes the tension in the room and on the conversation can get a little heated. But for the most part, we're dealing with a very, very close collaborative effort between the United States and Israel, and there's tremendous understanding. The President understands full well that we cannot absorb ballistic missiles into our country without responding. And at some point, you know, the President said, let's try to spiral this down, lower the temperature, and which, of course, Prime Minister decided to do. Look, the main issue here is that Iran is trying to connect the negotiations with the United States with Lebanon. And they have nothing to do with Lebanon. We're not going to allow Hezbollah to dominate Lebanon, to fire killer drones and missiles and rockets into our northern communities and let them have impunity in Beirut. That's understood really by everyone, particularly by our American friends. So when we hit Hezbollah, that has nothing to do with Iran, and they have to stay out of it. Lebanon wants Iran to stay out of it. We're on the same page with Lebanon about keeping Iran out of our area.
I mean, this has been going on so long with Hezbollah. I was there in 2006 during the big war that Israel had with Hezbollah. Yet Iran seems to have successfully convinced President Trump to link Hezbollah and Lebanon with the broader ceasefire. How does that complicate things for you?
I don't think so. I don't think that President Trump is going to allow Iran that kind of largesse. They're not going to be successful in linking Lebanon. Lebanon will not have a future if it remains linked to Iran. The president of Lebanon has said that, President Aoun. We believe that in order for Israel to have security and for Lebanon to have freedom, it is absolutely imperative that Iran is delinked from the Lebanon issue. Truly, it's imperative that Iran be delinked from pretty everything else in the Middle East. And I think that's the direction. President Trump has said repeatedly he will not sign a bad deal with Iran, and a bad deal would be allowing that linkage to take place. Right. It's not going to happen.
But in terms of a deal itself, the Financial Times reports that President Trump told Benjamin Netanyahu that he's got no choice but to accept whatever the president negotiates. Here's what the Financial Times wrote. He won't have any choice, Trump told the FT in a telephone interview. I call the shots. I call all the shots. He, Netanyahu, doesn't call the shots. Will Israel be beholden to accept whatever President Trump comes up with?
You know, I only wish that the Financial Times reporting that would be on the calls with President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, because that's not the tone of the conversation. It's much more one of cooperation, of friendship, of collegiality, and they consult with one another. And I think ultimately, we entered this war against Iran together. We will end it together without tension or acrimony that some journalists would like to have. The bottom line is there are people, the same people trying to link Iran to Lebanon are the same people trying to de-link the United States and Israel.
But Mr.
Iran won't be linked to Lebanon, and we will not be de-linked from the United States.
But, Mr. Ambassador, the FT might not have been on the phone conversation between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, but they were told that by the president.
Well, I've been on those conversations, and I think the president was making a point. I think it's much more important to put the focus on what we actually implement together rather than a statement like that or other statements that he's made from time to time. The fact of the matter is the level of collaboration between our countries has never been greater. We have the same objectives. We have the same intentions. We don't want to see Iran to be a regional power. We don't want to see a menacing, malign Ayatollah regime in Tehran. We've worked together to make sure that's not the case, and we'll continue to do so. And a sentence in an article or in a conversation here and there is really not the issue. Look, they've had hundreds and hundreds of hours of conversations over the past year and a half. And they've met 7 times here in Washington, once in Jerusalem. So to take one statement out of the hundreds of hours of conversation and turn that in to the centerpiece of their relationship, I think is a huge mistake.
All right. We'll see how it goes from here. Ambassador Michael Leiter, good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time today, sir.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.